revolves around the question of whether or not a man would shoot himself in the back. It's the story of a wide-open and lawless Canadian city, and the story of one clean cop. It's a long-buried mystery first brought to light by our colleagues at CBC Montreal's Newswatch. For decades, Trois-Rivières, halfway between Montreal and Quebec City, was a quiet backwater that prided itself on old-fashioned values. Until big-time crime and corruption moved in the late 1960s. Trois-Rivières became a hotbed of prostitution. Quebec's steamy crime tabloids flashed the town's newly acquired fame across their pages. If you were looking for cheap, available sex, downtown Trois-Rivières was the place to buy it.
In '68, there was at least 250 pimps doing business in Trois-Rivières with 350, 400 prostitutes.
Jean Matot, as legal counsel for City Hall in the 1960s, tried to clean up the town. He remembers when some of the police were as bad as the prostitutes. Nobody was arrested?
Nobody was arrested.
Were any of the police officers involved in...
Oh, yes. Well, you had police involved in that, sure.
The police were out walking the streets, but the newspapers accused them of turning a blind eye. And one city councillor accused them of aiding and abetting the prostitution racket.
Detectives were surely helping the mafia, and the prostitutes and the pimps.
It sounds like the Chicago of the 1930s.
Yes, that was the really open city.
In a town open to crime, there was at least one police officer back then who had a reputation for being honest. Detective Sergeant Louis-Georges Dupont. But mysteriously, in November 1969, he was found dead in an unmarked police car. On the floor, his service revolver. Near the windshield, a note to his wife. I ask you to forgive me. The Trois-Rivières detectives quickly ruled his death a suicide.
My mother was always saying, it's not right, it's not right. That's not what happened.
Dupont's oldest son, Jacques, and his brother, Robert, remember their father as a proud and dedicated cop.
He was an honest guy who liked his job.
That's the emblem of the city of Trois-Rivières. He was proud to wear it. When he talked about the city, he straightened his tie. He didn't deserve what happened to him.
What do you think happened to your father?
What happened to our father? He was murdered. He was murdered. That's crystal clear to us.
If Dupont was murdered, then who killed him? His sons don't have the answer, and neither does anyone else. But as they began their own investigation, they uncovered some troubling questions about how the Trois-Rivières Police Department handled their father's case. They discovered their father was part of a police force where enforcing the law did not seem to be the first order of business for some officers. One of the busiest brothels in town was right across from the courthouse, and a frequent patron was a high-ranking officer named Jean-Marie Hubert.
He had his girlfriend, a prostitute, working in that hotel and bar and renting a room for the hour. He was there drinking beer while she was working. The lieutenant detective.
Was this just a case of a few bad apples, or was corruption widespread in the police force?
Well, I am sure that the police force knew everything, every police, but with the law of silence that they have, they never said anything.
That law of silence wasn't broken until the summer of 1969, when Quebec's newly formed police commission came to town to investigate. It was the province's first inquiry into police corruption, and one of the officers who testified was Detective Sergeant Dupont. Dupont's sons were told by the commission that no record of their father's testimony exists. All they could confirm was that he testified in secret on September 17th at 8:45 p.m. His wife, Jeanne d'Arc, remembers how frightened he was.
Il avait peur, il avait peur. Je voulais pas aller.
He was afraid. He was afraid of testifying. I suppose he knew something.
The commission denounced the Trois-Rivières police for helping the prostitution racket instead of stopping it. They called the head of detectives, Georges Gagnon, incompetent and singled out Jean-Marie Hubert and another detective for not cracking down on the prostitution trade. In August, the town council voted to fire the two detectives. But within 2 weeks, the decision was reversed, and they were back on the force. By September, the police commission left Trois-Rivières, but crime and corruption remained. In October, lawyer Jean Methot was warned that the mafia was trying to muscle into the town's gambling business.
I didn't know anybody in the police of Trois-Rivières to go to.
You didn't know one clean cop.
Well, no, I didn't.
But then a friend suggested he meet with Dupont.
He looked to me as a man of integrity, and he was described as a clean cop by a lot of people.
Dupont agreed to look into the mafia connection. On the morning of November 5th, he left the police station. He told fellow officers he was working on an investigation. Then he went missing. 3 days later, the police called in the local media. The disgraced chief of detectives, Georges Gagnon, seemed visibly uncomfortable. The police had no clues, no leads, but they were clearly uneasy about linking Dupont's disappearance to the recent corruption scandal.
Est-ce que M. Dupont a des ennemis mortels, on pourrait dire, qui pourraient attenter à sa vie, d'après vous?
Non, monsieur. Non.
Est-ce que cette disparition pourrait avoir quelques rapports avec des événements récents qui se sont produits à Trois-Rivières?
Aucunement, monsieur, aucunement.
M. Gagnon, vous,
Gagnon offered this theory about his missing detective.
quand des dépressifs,
Je dois vous dire que M. Dupont a repris son travail le 3 novembre. Il était incomplet. Et puis, moi, j'ai trouvé, depuis un mois que j'avais pas vu, j'ai trouvé qu'il était déprimé. Vous savez, la figure il avait changé, il était amaigri. C'était pas le même Dupont. Là, la dernière fois qu'il avait rencontré.
Was your husband depressed in the days before he died?
Non.
No, but he was nervous because of the inquiry into prostitution he testified at. He said, I don't want to die and leave you alone with the 4 children.
Disons, 3 semaines et un mois avant sa disparition.
3-4 weeks before his disappearance, we got a couple of anonymous phone calls. When you know you're being watched, you check everything. You become nervous. And then they say, look, the guy's changed.
Regardez, ce gars-là a changé.
On November 10th, the Trois-Rivières police finally located Dupont, slumped over the front seat of his car. Their conclusion? Dupont shot himself through the chest. Trois-Rivières police seemed as eager to bury the case as they were to bury their fallen comrade. The officer assigned to investigate Dupont's death was the same detective tied to the prostitution scandal, Jean-Marie Hubert. And Hubert and his boys got right down to work. Town lawyer Jean Methot.
The police car was found at 9 o'clock. At noon, it was all washed. The seats were all changed. Everything was repaired 3 hours after. No inspection of the car. Nothing.
No fingerprint?
No fingerprints on the car, on the gun, on anything. There was no inquiry at all.
What did that say to you?
Well, that's it. It was a very fast affair.
Fast indeed. The police found what they identified as a suicide note. But in the list of his personal effects, there's no mention of a pen. And what about the bullet? This police document states they removed the seats from Dupont's car in the morning. Yet surprisingly, they didn't notice a bullet hole. Only after the pathologist said he couldn't find a bullet in the body did police return to the car later that evening and somehow discover one in the front seat. Ballistics experts also said the bullet was too badly damaged to be matched with Dupont's gun, even though it had supposedly gone through his body without hitting any bones before coming to rest in a soft car seat.
Oui.
Dr. Jean Houle was the pathologist who examined the body that day. His notes show the police spelled it all out very clearly to him.
They presented it to me as a case of suicide, and they even told me he had been depressed for some time.
The police also spelled it out at the coroner's inquest, held in a park building often used by children to change their skates. Marcel Chautier was the coroner. Did you feel that this case was cut and dry? Nothing much to solve here?
I thought so, yes. I thought with the report from the doctor and with his personal notes that he was committing suicide, I thought it was a clear-cut case, though. It was an easy case.
But the facts were they couldn't link the bullet to the detective's gun, and there were no fingerprints on the detective's gun. All these facts were in the police report. Did you see that report?
I certainly saw it then and studied it and looked at it with the Crown Attorney, but I don't recall specifically those points that you're pointing to now.
Detective Sergeant Louis-Georges Dupont and his file were buried. For more than 2 decades, the police records of the Dupont affair remained sealed until Dupont's son filed access to information requests to force the city and the police department to hand over the records. The documents confirmed the shabby police investigation into their father's death. No fingerprints on the gun, a bullet that couldn't be identified. Then the big break. They got their hands on the photos taken at the autopsy of their father. The photos reminded Jacques of what he had seen when he identified his father's body at the morgue in 1969.
I was struck by the wound in front. There was plenty of blood.